Welcome to today's episode of the AWS Migration and Modernization Podcast. In all of the other episodes, we talk about success criteria and success strategies. In this episode, we are going to talk about how to sabotage your migration. I'm Matthias Patzak. I'm an executive in residence with AWS. And with me today is my colleague, Jake Burns, also an executive in residence. Jake, I'm really looking forward on your tactics to sabotage cloud migration.
Yeah, this should be a fun conversation. So we're going to frame this as how you can sabotage your transformation. But of course, these are lessons of what not to do. But there's some very clear patterns that I've seen after being involved in hundreds of migrations over the years. And let's talk about how you could, if you didn't want it to go well, what can you do?
So what would be the first one?
So I think the first one I'd start with is put no one in charge. Just put a committee in charge of the migration. So what this does is it will create a diffusion of responsibility. And so the thought process here is if nobody's in charge when things go wrong, nobody can be blamed. So you won't be blamed. So it's like a perfect strategy to ensure that progress can never happen because nobody gets the final say on what the decision is.
But who is or who should be in charge?
You put nobody in charge. Just make it a committee.
But as a counter tactic, who actually should be in charge in a cloud migration?
Yeah. So obviously don't do this. Somebody should be in charge. A single person should be in charge of the entire thing. And that person should have both the authority and the accountability in equal parts, right? Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people within the organization that are also in charge of their parts of it, right? But it just means for every part of the migration process, there's a clear owner who is accountable. The anti-pattern here is this kind of lack of accountability and lack of decision authority. So oftentimes what you see are people who get to make the decisions, but they don't have to live with the consequences. And then you have different people within the organization who have to live with the consequences of the decisions. And obviously this leads to very poor decision making. And that's probably one of the biggest ways that really any transformative change will fail is just there's nobody making decisions and nobody who has to live with the consequences.
But there must be a reason why so many organizations set up committees. So is it to get buy-in, or I doubt that it's really because someone wants to sabotage a cloud migration. Maybe it's the reason, but I believe they have other reasons.
Yeah, I don't think anyone intentionally does this to sabotage a transformation. I think that it gets done with good intentions, right? It's kind of like, let's everybody be inclusive here. Let's make sure we come to the right decision. And I think oftentimes leaders will conflate kind of two different ideas. So getting input from a wide variety of people and having committees in and of themselves is not a bad thing, right? You want to have transparency. You want to hear all the best ideas. You want to have diverse opinions and all of those things. But ultimately, somebody has to make a call. And with migrations, I'll say that lack of clear decision-making and decisiveness is one of the main reasons why they don't get started. Somebody, for example, needs to say, the plan is good enough, let's try a migration. Just that very simple thing, that very act of, we're going to start on this day. If nobody's in charge, and you can have a committee that argues this for a very long period of time, perhaps forever. So ultimately, somebody has to make a decision, and they have to be willing to live with the consequences of that decision.
I wonder, do people mix up this concept of the Rusky formula? So someone needs to be responsible, someone needs to be accountable, someone needs just to be informed or consulted. Because there are different roles in cloud migration, and you need to inform certain people, you need to consult. So why are people setting up these committees?
Yeah, I know. And again, I don't think the committees are bad. I think that when it's the decision-making mechanism is by committee. In other words, there's not it's an anti-pattern of the pattern of success, which is to have a decisive leader who has both the authority and the accountability in equal parts. It's there's a concept in aviation called pilot in command.
Yeah.
So right, and any flight, whether it be a student pilot flying a Cessna or the flight that you're going to take home to Germany later, an Airbus probably, right? Large jet. People talk about pilot and co-pilot, but they're really all pilots, right? And the airlines call one a captain and a first officer. But according to the FAA, there's a pilot in command. There's always a single person on that aircraft, whether it be one pilot, no passengers, or hundreds of passengers. And that pilot has both the final decision-making authority to do anything for the safety of that flight, but also is accountable for everything that happens on that flight. Mm-hmm. So that person is, in fact, the boss of the entire airplane, right? Make sure that everything takes. We can take a lot of lessons from aviation in technology and IT. I would argue that that's one of the reasons why aviation has such a great safety record, is that pilot in command concept, that there is that single person. So I think that we can carry that over into cloud migrations or any other thing that we're doing, and just say for this area, and again, it could be for one for the overall migration, but maybe one for just doing QA, right? You are the pilot in command for that area, meaning you are the one who makes the decision, but you are the one that is accountable for the results of that decision.
Okay. I've seen cloud migrations that had a single threaded leader. This is how we would call it at Amazon, but still the migration was totally stalled. Have you seen similar migrations?
Yeah. So it's not the only thing that you need, but it is one of the ingredients. So I've seen that as well, and I've seen migrations get stalled. Typically, in my experience, migrations get stalled because of excess complexity. Is the biggest reason. Just trying to do too many things that are not related to migration. So having a pilot in command or a strong leader with authority and accountability doesn't guarantee success. But I would say without it, it's very difficult to be successful. And if I was trying to sabotage a cloud migration, I would certainly not have one of those leaders. That's one of the things that I would try to do. I would just put a committee in charge of everything.
Or you put up a single leader, but with no accountability.
There you go. So there's another one. So so say you have to put a leader in charge. Okay. So that leader.
Because I like to have someone I can blame.
Yes, so there's two flavors of this. So you have the accountable leader with no authority. So they are the ones that just gets blamed for everything. But on the flip side, you then now have to have someone making the decisions, and they will not have to, so they will have the authority without the accountability. And so, yes, if I was to sabotage a transformation and I couldn't use the committee model, I would certainly do it that way. I would have multiple leaders. None of these leaders would be accountable and have authority for the same thing. So I'm a leader and I can say, we're going to do this, and I don't have to worry about the outcome of that. Somebody else has to live with the outcome of somebody else's decisions, and it would be chaos.
But why would you set up a single leader who is not accountable as an organization? What is if I would ask the 5 whys,
yes.
What is the reason?
I don't think it's done by design.
Okay.
I think it's and we see this in organizations all the time, right? I think we can all think of examples of, a leader who gets to make decisions, and then perhaps people on their team are kind of delegated the responsibilities. I don't know if you've ever worked for somebody who tells you it has to be done this way, but you have to make it work. You don't get to decide how it gets done, but it's on you to make sure it gets done properly. I think that's an anti-pattern. Now, some of that in small amounts might be unavoidable, but I think in general success happens when that same scenario I say, look, this is the goal that needs to happen. You decide how to do it, and you're accountable for the results.
But I could also sabotage a transformation because I make someone accountable. And then what would this person do in some organization which don't have a proper failure culture? They would avoid any risk.
Right. Yes. Yes. Well, that's misaligned incentives, right?
True.
Yeah. So let's see. Now, say you have this leader in place, And what are some of the bad decisions that they could make that would sabotage this transformation even further? Well, one great idea that I have is, and I tell people this all the time, go send your team to training. Tell the team you're going to the cloud. We've made a decision to go to the cloud. Get them trained, certified, and everything. And then after you do all of that, then do you outsource the migration to somebody else?
Or you don't start it. So everyone was already trained, but they can't apply the knowledge they got.
Yes. So this is one way you can sabotage a transformation or a cloud migration, or any transformation really, is because you get their hopes up and then you deny them the payoff, right? So they've done all the work of learning and then they don't get the satisfaction of actually doing.
So the outsourcing is not the sabotaging act. It's the combination.
Yes, it's the getting their hopes up and getting them ready to do it and then outsourcing it.
Okay.
Now, if you're going to outsource it from the beginning, I think outsourcing isn't necessarily bad. In fact, I think it's a very useful tool in migration process. I think generally you're better off letting more of your team do the work as much as possible because they're the ones that are going to have to maintain it long term. So outsourcing maybe some of the work that they don't want to do is useful, and outsourcing some of the expertise in the beginning to kind of socialize that with your team and get best practices instilled into your team is good. But also expecting your team to do the work without having been trained is an anti-pattern. But if you really wanted to kill morale, then it would be just to get their hopes up, get them trained, get them certified, and then just deny them the chance and outsource the entire thing.
And to influence it. And maybe also have compensation tied to the success of the cloud migration.
Even better, right?
I've seen this, that the compensation of IT people is partly depending on the success of the cloud migration, and then it's outsourced. Right,
yeah. So this goes back to kind of that original theme, which is the authority and accountability being in balance, right? Mm-hmm. So if you are held accountable for someone else's choices, so in this case, you're outsourcing the migration, so you have no influence on how it's done because someone else is doing it. But now you have to live with the consequences, whether it be your gold or your success is measured on the success of what the outsourcers do, or it could be just the very fact that you have to maintain an environment that you didn't have any influence in building. That is another consequence that you might have to live with. So the flip side of that is, if you wanted to be successful and not sabotage your migration, then you'd want to train your team and then allow them to actually use that training. That is the pattern of success.
Or I wouldn't just train them. Wouldn't this be another tactics?
You could do that. I'd say that's better than training them and then letting them believe that they're going to do it and then giving it to somebody else. That's worst case scenario. If you're going to outsource it, then I would probably not train them to do the migration, because I wouldn't want to make their morale bad. But I think the absolute best way to do it would be to get them trained, then allow them to participate in the migration. Maybe they don't do the entire thing. Maybe some of it is outsourced. But eventually, in an ideal migration scenario, in my opinion, the transition from migration to operations is so smooth that it's almost not noticeable, right? Because as you're migrating things, and hopefully you're starting to modernize them as well, you're operating those systems that are migrated into the cloud. So we like to think of these as kind of very discrete, separate phases, like migration phase, modernization phase, operation phase. But in actuality, they're all kind of the same thing. One blends into the other. And if you allow your full-time employees, your team that's going to be there operating in the cloud, do the migration, then that transition is as smooth as it could possibly be because they build it and then immediately start running it. So that's one of the reasons why I think investing in them and allowing them to do it is the best case scenario.
And how can outsourcing work? So I've seen different flavors of outsourcing. Some organizations really just outsource everything, and the IT organization is just IT procurement. But I've also seen that customers get partners in to help them with doing the migration and maybe later the operations. But how do outsourcing properly?
I mean, it's totally valid if you are an organization that outsources currently. Like say you're on-prem and you're outsourcing your IT, then it's only natural to outsource the migration itself, right? And then it just becomes the issue of how to manage potentially multiple outsourced organizations or switching to one that's cloud native, if that makes sense. But in either case, the best case scenario is to have the people who do the migration actually do the operations, right? Because here's what happens if you don't have that. You're depending on documentation, essentially, right? You have the migration people create runbooks and documentation on how, and then if that's not accurate, and if we're living in the real world, it's never 100% accurate, then you run into problems. There's this big learning curve on how to operate the cloud. And you don't want to have those periods of time in your business where your technology operations are not running smoothly, right? Where you have those hiccups and those big learning curves that can cause disruption. So it's best to avoid those. The other problem with it is the incentive problem. So you think about it, if you're building an environment that you're not going to have to manage, I'm not going to say you're going to do it poorly, you're just less incentivized to do it with long-term resiliency and operational excellence in mind. On the other hand, if you know whether you're an outsourced organization or you're the full-time staff of the company that's doing the migrating, if you're building it knowing that you're going to have to operate it, then you're going to be incentivized to do it in a way that's going to be easy to maintain, that's going to have long-term operational excellence and maintainability. So it's the classic DevOps principle. You build it, you run it. There's a reason why that's such a catchy phrase. It works.
A few minutes before, we already touched a bit on incentives. So I was just thinking about how I would sabotage a migration, and I would probably use incentives a lot. What have you seen?
Oh yeah, definitely. Incentives are your friend here, whether you're trying to sabotage or avoid sabotaging a migration. So the way I've seen migrations get unintentionally sabotaged is to incentivize the status quo. So you have a mandate to go to cloud. This is the mission, this is the project. Everybody's told that's what to do. But then, what is your performance review going to look like? If you go and experiment with something in the cloud and it doesn't go well, will you be punished for that? If you ignore the cloud mandate completely and just keep operating how you were on premises, are you going to get rewarded for that? The incentive structures are ultimately what's going to influence the behavior of the organization, not the mandate. So mandates are great, and I get this a lot when I'm talking to customers and I talk about my cloud migration story, and they say, well, we don't, I talk about I had a mandate from the CEO, and they say, well, that's great, but I don't have that mandate. I have to say, well, the mandate was nice, but that's not enough, right? You still have to win everybody over. The incentives still have to be aligned, right? So like in my organization, I was able to just control kind of the incentives in my organization, which was responsible for doing the migration. And I created a whole new career ladder, right? So you have technical track, manager track, and cloud track. And so if you do something like that and you have a cloud track that actually incentivizes, like the titles are bigger, the track goes up higher, then it's clear that, as an individual contributor, the way you're going to get promoted in this organization from now forward is to be involved in the cloud project. Then you have, very well-established and equally applied rules as to how to get those roles and then make sure they're enforced fairly. That's one way you can kind of incentive the behavior you're looking for. So you're not just saying we have a mandate to move to cloud. It's now in every individual's best interest to get the certification, to migrate to the cloud, to participate in the migration process, to mentor others, because those are all parts of the qualifications to get those roles, which are going to get them promoted within the organization.
In one of your reInvent talks, maybe last year or the year before, you had a claim that I adopted and use a lot. It's don't start when you're ready, but become ready by starting. And this is what I see a lot, especially with traditional IT organizations. They plan and plan and plan and plan. And this is what I observe a lot, how someone is sabotaging their migration. They're just endlessly planning, maybe because of the culture of the organization and not having a failure culture. But what's your thinking about this endless planning?
It's related to incentives for sure, but I think it's its own topic in itself. Like one way I would sabotage a migration would be have a goal to create a perfect plan, because that's completely unattainable.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is also, if you get something that you consider perfect, it's going to take a long time. So you're going to delay the migration for a long time. And then what ends up happening is your plan meets reality, right? And so for most of us, almost everybody who's doing this, it's their first time doing a cloud migration. And so what ends up happening is you can't anticipate all the things that you're going to need to do. You learn by doing. And so you can develop a perfect plan for your cloud migration, but I would argue that you can only do so after you've done the migration or towards the end of the migration, because you've learned what is in that plan. So it's an anti-pattern for that reason. First, having a goal of developing a perfect plan wastes time, right? And time, the longer the decision to migrate, between the decision to migrate and the beginning of the migration, the more risk the migration becomes, because there's less doubt, or there's more doubt that it could be done, there's less confidence that it could be done, et cetera. You're killing momentum before it gets started. You're creating inertia. But the other reason is because the plan's very unlikely to do anything. And so it's activity rather than progress. And there is usefulness in planning, but I think that a perfect plan is an unattainable goal, and is a way. If I wanted to sabotage, I would say create a perfect plan before you get started.
What is the counter tactic?
The counter tactic is create a plan that's good enough. Do planning, of course, but understand that you're going to have to pivot. So it's the mental model that I use for this is, instead of investing in being able to predict the future, invest in being able to be able to handle any future that comes, right? So it's an investment in agility rather than an investment in prediction. This is a totally different way of thinking from kind of the traditional way of thinking. But the key insight here is predicting the future is a losing proposition. It's very hard to do. But it's actually, especially with the cloud and all the technology that comes with it, becoming agile, truly agile, as an organization is now possible, creating more what we call at Amazon two-way doors, turning those one-way doors into two-way doors, making decisions that used to be unreversible, making them reversible. So with cloud, for example, buying a storage array, that's a largely irreversible decision. It's very hard to get rid of that if you change your mind afterwards. So you have to make it work. So you end up making bad decisions after you made that bad decision, right? Because you're committed to that path that was a mistake. Now, if you're using cloud infrastructure, you can provision a storage array and change your mind tomorrow and do something completely different. Maybe you don't do storage at all. Maybe you do object storage. Maybe you make it a different size. Maybe you delay provisioning that to another time. There's infinite decisions you can make. And so my argument is, in the context of infrastructure, you're going from having to be able to predict the future, which is the dilemma of a CIO that's managing infrastructure. I have to predict what the business is going to have to need a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, to an investment in agility. There's still effort involved. We're learning how to use the cloud, but we are letting go of that notion that we have to know what's coming next, and instead investing our energy in becoming better at adapting to whatever comes next.
So now I've set up a large steering committee. I have a single leader who is not accountable. I had my people trained, but outsourced everything. Now I ask this single leader to come up with a plan and ask for more and more and more details. What would be the next thing I should do to sabotage this migration?
Okay, say you're forced to create a plan, and it doesn't have to be perfect, then or you can augment your sabotage tactic of creating a perfect plan. Keep it a complete secret. Don't share it with anyone.
Why?
So there's so many great reasons why this will hurt your progress. So first off, if you have a plan, you keep it a secret. Nobody even can be sure that you have a plan. So you may not have a plan at all in anyone's mind. So that's great for confidence. The second thing is, if you don't share your plan, then nobody has an opportunity to point out potential flaws in your plan. So now you have this plan that, everybody has blind spots. Anyone, however brilliant they are, they create a plan, there's going to be problems with it. So by not exposing that, by being not transparent with that, you can hide those flaws for a very long period of time, and that's more likely to lead to a sabotaged migration. Also, there'll be no sense of ownership beyond you. So now you're depending on all of these people, the people that work for you, to help make this migration possible, and they have no sense of ownership because, well, they had no input into the plan. So now the counter of that, of course, is to have a plan that's good enough, share it, be very transparent, be overly transparent, right? Because I want people to look at my plan and tell me that may not work, that may be a problem. I may not agree with them, but I want as many minds looking at that as possible. I also want as many people to have a sense of ownership in this, because people may want your plan to work, but they very much want their plan to work. And the best case scenario is they want our plan to work, right? So if everybody has input into it and gets a chance to have ownership and has a sense of ownership for that plan, then they're going to work harder and push harder through any barriers that come up along the way because they want their plan to be successful.
So have a detailed plan and don't share it.
If you want to sabotage, then make sure it's perfect and don't show it to anybody.
So now I've asked my team to come up with a plan, but we don't share the plan. What would be next if I don't want to migrate to the cloud?
Yeah, so a good way to sabotage your transformation, and you have plenty of opportunities to do this, is take advice from somebody who's never done it before. At one moment in time, this was the only option. Right?
But does this really happen?
Oh, yeah. So there are no shortage of experts out there on every topic, right? I would wager that even today, most of the people giving advice on cloud migration have not led a cloud migration before. Now, I don't think you have to have personally led one in order to have good advice. I think it helps tremendously, right? And nowadays, more than ever, there are so many people who have been successful with the cloud, and they tend to be willing to talk about it, for obvious reasons. So if you're going to take advice, I would ask, have you done this before? Or have you advised someone who's been successful with this before, right? This seems like an obvious thing, but I just see it so common. It's so common that people take advice from people who haven't done a cloud migration before. And there's so many things that just sound like good ideas, but actually in reality aren't good ideas. You have to have a rock solid plan before you start. Well, that's good advice if you're doing something for other things. If you're building like a rocket ship or something like that, where it's really a one-way door, it better be right because, maybe it's going to be very expensive if it goes wrong. But with a cloud migration, there's just so many ways that you can lower the cost of failure. This learn by doing approach works so well because, first of all, you can choose which workloads you start with. You could start with even just made-up workloads, right, that have zero consequence. But even when you get to, say, development workloads or test workloads that are low consequence and easy, you could do it in such a way where, you can fail back very easily on a migration, for example, if it doesn't work. You could have very good testing put in place. You can clone environments. You could do so many things that make the failure not catastrophic or even make the failure completely unnoticeable is the ideal state. So when you're dealing with something like that, and these are not intuitive if you haven't been through it, right? So a lot of people will give advice that sounds great, and it sounds great to the person that's hearing it as well because they haven't gone through it before. But my advice is just check with somebody who has actually done a cloud migration and see some of the things are counterintuitive. And so
get out of the building. So I talk a lot about innovation, and innovation rarely happens in your meeting room. And this is why, in regards of innovation, one of the standard advice is get out of your building, get out of your meeting room, visit your customers, observe your customers. And in regards of cloud migration, get out of your building, attend conferences, talk to peers, talk to people who have done it before, and be curious.
Yes. I would say this is such a good point. Get out of your building. This could be the make it or break it detail for you, right? Because again, we live in a time, and I always keep saying this has never been a better time to do a migration, just because so many people have done it before. And honestly, there's been people who've done it and failed as well. Talk to them, right? There's been many people who've done it and succeeded. Talk to them. You could talk to many of them, and you could see very quickly that there's some things that they all have in common. It's one of the things that I was really surprised with when I started advising organizations on cloud migration. I thought it would take, maybe 100 before like clear patterns would emerge. But it was really like only a dozen, 2 dozens when it was like these very, very clear patterns emerged. And that really shocked me, like how small of a sample size I needed to really see those patterns. And now that I've seen hundreds of them, it's always the same patterns. So it's, in a sense, like this kind of advisory role that I do for cloud migrations has become easy to the point of being boring, but it's still very helpful to customers, so I continue to do it. But the patterns are very, very clear. So talk to somebody who's done it before and follow their advice, or at least use them as a safety net to make sure that the advice that you're getting is actually valid.
What I see people doing this, but they keep doing it forever. So they are not really starting. They're just getting out and talking, getting insights. They're asking AWS partners. They're talking to AWS account teams. They're talking to other customers of us. But still, they shy away.
Yeah. So I would say the next way that I would sabotage a migration would be to start tomorrow. Whatever I could do today, just schedule it for tomorrow. And the reason this is an anti-pattern is because, especially in the cloud, one of the superpowers of the cloud is it just allows you to do things so quickly. Even just training, even testing. You could set up an AWS account in 5 minutes with a credit card, right? And just start testing. Now, of course, if you're in a business environment, do it through proper channels, but it's not a very time-consuming thing. And so training is available online. There are solutions architects that are one call away. Most of these things that you could do, you could get started today. You could just decide in the beginning of the day, we're going to do something today, right? Too often, people delay the decision. They delay the next action. Even if it's just till tomorrow, tomorrow may never come. Oftentimes, you just keep delaying. So the real key to being successful with a migration, above all else, is to just get started.
But people are so busy. And capacity constraints and busyness and conflicting priorities is one of the main reasons that I see why organizations don't start or getting anything done.
That's true, but what are they busy doing?
Everything.
Right. Well, a lot of the things that they're busy doing, at least in the context of cloud migration, I would argue are things that don't even need to be done at all. Right. So when I get involved in a migration that's stalled, which is something that I've been doing a lot lately, I see people very busy. I see them busy forming committees. I see them busy arguing over the names of what these committees are, even. A lot of time spent on things like that. Even, the very well-established 7 Rs framework, which, I think doing that up front for your whole portfolio can take a lot of time and often can be very expensive when you're doing it, when you're paying for it. Why not make that an iterative process within your migration itself? Why do those decisions all have to be made ahead of time? Oftentimes, those decisions, by the time you get to the application that you decided to refactor, replatform, repurchase, or whatever the case may be, by the time you get to migrating that application, the situation has changed anyway. So a just-in-time approach for that can save you a lot of time. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I would say by getting started today, you will be freeing up your time to do the migration because you will be kind of short-circuiting all of those things that are perhaps not helpful, or you'll find out if they're helpful or not once you get started.
So it's really focusing on cloud migration, doing one thing and not multitasking.
Yes, multitasking would be another way I would sabotage. I would force the team to multitask and do many different things at once.
For example, your operation teams not having a dedicated cloud migration teams, but they are responsible for the on-premise workloads and the cloud workloads, or?
Well, how about we're going to migrate these workloads while we modernize them, while we're also doing our normal operations, while we're doing maybe another high-profile project. at that point, this business that you talk about, this is a lot of where it comes from. So one of the key responsibilities of a leader, I think for any big project, but certainly for a migration, is to kind of block and tackle a little bit in terms of like priorities for the team. So I think in a cloud migration, in my case, I asked my team to do a lot. We were doing training, migration, and day jobs at the same time. But the day job part, I did my best to try to deprioritize other projects while the migration was happening. Now, a certain amount of that is going to be unavoidable. You're going to have to respond to the business, and you're going to have to do things that the business needs to do. But I found that there were certain things that could be outsourced, just kind of undifferentiated work, like adding, disk arrays when storage volumes got full, or changing permissions for user accounts and handling first line support for tickets and things like that. Those kinds of things are very easy to outsource to free up time for your team that you're asking to learn these new skills and do a cloud migration, something they've probably never done before. So as much as you can be focused on a single goal, especially something like this, especially something that you want to do fast and you want to build momentum around and have excitement around, having fewer distractions, the better. And so that's why I advocate for decoupling modernization from migration. It's one of the reasons why I advocate for that. Focus on each. Put 100% of your focus on each. Do one and then do the other. And then both get done more quickly and more safely and more efficiently. But I'd say for everything else that you're doing, try to focus on one thing. But if I was going to sabotage, I would tell my team, I'd give them 6 top priorities at all times, at a minimum.
And all incentivized differently.
Oh, yeah. Right. The cloud migration, none of the incentives would be tied to the cloud migration.
So what about failure culture?
Yeah, so we hear this a lot. This tolerance for failure is needed, right? I think this is one that gets kind of misunderstood. So often I think it's the quote is like you have to be okay with failure or try to fail.
Fail fast, fail early.
Yeah, I don't think failure is a good thing, to be honest with you. So I think this gets misinterpreted. Personally, I try to avoid failure. So I would amend that saying. I would say it's okay to fail, except when it isn't. Right, I think knowing the difference is important, right? But I think the point here is that if I was to sabotage a migration, I would set up a system where the first sign of failure, we would just give up. That's really the anti-pattern. And this is the thing that I see too often is, an organization will try something, it doesn't work, then they just conclude we can't do it, or the cloud doesn't work, or whatever the case may be. So the key is to reduce the cost of failure as much as possible so that failures aren't catastrophic, so that they become learning experiences, right? And also make a distinction between the types of failures that are okay and the ones that aren't. So if you are migrating a production ERP system, then that's not the time to be trying to fail. But if you're learning how the cloud works and you're in a test environment, I would say actually try to fail in that environment, because the failure costs you nothing, and it actually gains you a lot of experience, and it's going to keep you from making those failures when the stakes are high later on. So it's kind of have the wisdom to know when it's okay to fail and when it's not.
And this is why prioritization in the cloud migration is important, and your general advice is start with the less riskiest ones early.
Yes, very good point. So when you start with the easy, least risky ones, if you do that well enough, those first few applications that you migrate, if they fail catastrophically, nobody should notice.
Yeah.
Right. So in my case, I think the first migration that we migrated was our internal monitoring system, the first real, or like as a jump box or something like that. So if our internal monitoring system goes down, nobody else in the organization is going to notice that. That's just our observability dashboard. It's not good for us, but we can get that up quickly again. And really, there was no reputational harm. There was no lack of momentum. We learned one way not to do it, right? So definitely know that you're going to fail along the way, but construct things in such a way that those failures are they work in your favor rather than against you. And the way that you do that is you do the least critical things first, and you give your team just a chance to try things. Because, again, going back to the perfect plan, how are you going to determine what a perfect plan is or a good plan is? Well, you have to try things and figure out what the bad plan, what the things that shouldn't go into a good plan are, right? And so that experimentation is super important. And it's also about resilience as well. So experimentation, failing for learning, but also knowing that sometimes along the way, one of the things that you don't want to have fail is probably going to fail also. Yeah. And realize that that isn't indication that you should give up, right? It's a resilience thing. And another reason why momentum is so important in a migration is because when you get momentum on your side, and what I mean by momentum is that people see that this is happening and it's working. People both within your team and outside your organization, like there's a lot of people, a lot of eyes on you when you're doing something new like this. And what you want to have happen is you want them to have enough confidence in you that if there is a slip up later on, that they'll forgive you, right? And so if you start with your most critical application and want to demonstrate value, this can work if you're a very highly competent organization that already has that kind of confidence. That's when I would say, go ahead and do that if that's your situation. But for most of the customers that I deal with, and I think most that are migrating right now, they're not those kinds of organizations. It's the kind of organizations that are a little bit unsure about this. Maybe certain people are sure, but the rest of the organization is unsure.
And this is why, from my experience, they often stick to what they know. And this is why they build a data center in the cloud.
Well, if I was going to sabotage a migration, I would build a data center in the cloud. If all else failed, everything else, somehow we still got to the cloud, I would build it exactly like we had it on premise, and I would operate it exactly how we had it on premise.
But it can't be a failure because this is how we did it before, isn't it?
I think, unfortunately, I've seen this done many times, and I could tell you it is a failure, and I'll tell you why, for a number of reasons. The first one is cost. When people, the people that I talk to and who have the impression that the cloud is costly, whenever you go and look at how they determine that, almost always they're doing a like-for-like comparison. So it's like, if I built my data center in the cloud, it will cost more. My response is kind of like, that's obvious, right? It's obvious to see why renting a resource, if you think about it that way, is going to be more expensive than just buying it and depreciating if you're going to keep the resource forever in that same state. But that's not how you get value out of the cloud, right? So for one thing, let's just say from an IT infrastructure point of view, you always build for greater capacity than what you need at the moment. So I have to think about 3 years down the line, how am I going to grow into this capacity that I'm buying at this moment in time? If I provision systems in the cloud that way, then I'm going to be just wasting money, right? Because I'm going to have, like, imagine provisioning block storage that's 20% utilized. There are organizations I've seen that do that because that's how they do it on-prem. So they took their exact same policies and procedures and architecture patterns, but brought them to the cloud, didn't update them, and then concluded the cloud was expensive. Well, I would say run that volume as close to 100% as possible. Not so close that it's dangerous, right? Put automation in place that it can update it. If you can't put automation in place, then leave enough headroom that you can manually update it. But it could be far more than what is typical on premise, which is like usually 70 or 80% full. Then you go provision more storage. You can run a lot higher than that in the cloud, and you get more value because all of that unused space is waste, and you want to minimize the waste as much as possible. Now, that is a very, very simple example. I would go much farther than that, and of course, modernization is something that never ends. So then consider serverless architectures. Right. So why do you have to have servers in the cloud? Now, you start out that way, but as you modernize, maybe you containerize as a first step, and maybe you start thinking about fully serverless, things like Lambda and things like S3. People don't think about it, but S3 is a serverless way of doing storage. You can host a static website in S3. So Here's a real easy win for any organization that has servers that are running static websites. That doesn't have to be an EC2. That can actually be minimally viably refactored in migration to S3. It's a very easy thing to do. The cost savings will be very high. The resiliency will go way up. You don't have to worry about managing multiple servers and load balancers and so forth. That's one of the easiest wins that you can have. And then so you go after those easy ones, and then you progressively go and modernize further. But yes, building things exactly how they were on-prem in the cloud and keeping them that way will sabotage your cloud migration, because the migration will be considered a failure because the metrics across the board will not look good.
Thank you very much, Jake. What is your final thought? Do you have a final recommendation, or could you share a root cause for all of these actions on how to sabotage a transformation?
Yeah, I think the ultimate way to sabotage would be to, and this is a bit counterintuitive, but to set reasonable goals, right? And how does setting reasonable goals sabotage? Well, what that does is it robs you of the power of constraints. So, for example, having a lot of time. Like, let's say a reasonable goal for this cloud migration and give you 5 years to do it. Well, if I give you 5 years to do it, I guarantee you it's going to take at least 5 years, probably 6. And what is going to be done in those 5 years? Well, it's going to be probably a lot of things that aren't necessary. And that's going to lead to increased costs. That's going to lead to increased risk and increased complexity. You're probably going to build something more complex than you need, which is going to make operations far more difficult. So if you were to set an unreasonable goal, and this is what happened to me, let's say a 12-month timeline to do your migration, well, now you have to look and say, well, I don't know how I could fit this into 12 months. What can I cut out of here that's not necessary? What can I make more efficient, right? What can I optimize? What can I invent that doesn't exist now, because the current models don't fit into this? So it's really constraints as a forcing function for innovation. And it really just, say you have 100 things that you need to do and you have time to do all 100. Well, which one are you going to pick first? A lot of people are going to pick the easiest one first. This is what happens in a cloud migration. Let's say, let's just pick that easy one first because we've got all the time in the world. But if you only have time to do 10, now which one are you going to pick? Now you have to narrow it down to the 10 most essential ones. And whichever you pick out of that 10, it's going to be something probably a better choice than if you picked from the 100. So now maybe you don't get it done in 12 months. I didn't. It took 17 months. But I was forced to focus on what mattered and do what mattered most first, or at least attempt to do that. And also it forced me to try to come up with better ways of doing things than the established ways, because the established ways just wouldn't work. If the way you did it before always is going to work now, then you're just going to do the same way again, right? So innovation is largely a function of not being able to do it the way that's always been done before, that's always worked for you before, being forced to do it a different way. And we're always going to take the path of least resistance as humans. That's just how we're built. So sometimes we have to be forced into doing that. So I say you do that with time, do that with budget, do that even with headcount. So for me, I thought it was on face value, having a 12-month deadline, no budget, and a frozen headcount was kind of an impossible goal to go all in with AWS. It turned out it wasn't impossible, but it forced me to do some things that I normally wouldn't have done, and I think there were better decisions, right? So like, for example, it forced me to learn how to take a team of non-cloud IT professionals and turn them into world-class cloud engineers. That was a capability I didn't have, and I didn't know that I could create. I didn't know that these people could become that, but they could. Turns out they could. And it turns out that's a better way to do it, because there's not enough qualified cloud engineers in the world to migrate all of the people, all the organizations that want to migrate. So the only real scalable answer to get everyone to the cloud is to transform the people within these organizations and turn them into those people. And at the end of the day, that's the right answer for them, because they're going to need to operate it anyway. So having them do the migration prepares them for operating in the cloud. And it's just such a much smoother way of doing this. And so with budgets, it's the same thing as well, right? I see organizations, and I may have fell victim to this as well, who have very big budgets to do their migration, and they buy a lot of tools There's no shortage of vendors out there that will sell you tools. Cost optimization tools are an interesting one, like paying money for cost optimization tools. When Cost Explorer is what I used and was able to significantly cut basically my IT spend in half by going all in with AWS. So sometimes not having the money to spend could be a forcing function for saving money and for innovating. So yes, if I was going to sabotage a cloud migration or any transformation, the number one thing I would do is just set very reasonable goals, and I think the rest would take care of itself.
Thank you, Jake. I really enjoyed talking to you and learning from your wisdom on how to sabotage a transformation. And I'm really glad that you weren't on my team when I did my migration. But you have obviously a lot of experience in migrations. So I hope you enjoyed this session too. This was one of the episodes of the AWS Migration and Modernization podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today.